I am pleased to have been invited by the convening committee of the United Nations Association of Australia Queensland Division to deliver the UN International Day of Peace lecture for 2021. I appreciate the opportunity given to me by the Very Reverend Dr. Peter Catt, Dean of St John's Anglican Cathedral in Brisbane, and Major General Michael Smith, who passed on that invitation to me. I also want to acknowledge our first Australians who may be participating. In my acknowledgement of country, and drawing on the wisdom created in 60,000 years by the longest living culture on the planet, whose spiritual connections with the land and their stewardship of the environment teaches us so much, I pay my respects to their leaders and elders, past and present and emerging. As an aside, I also want to draw attention to the work of Australians for War Powers Reform. This organisation seeks to change the exercise of executive power in Australia to remove from the leadership of the government the right to send Australians into conflict anywhere overseas without a debate and a resolution approving the deployment being passed in the House of Representatives. This initiative is to assure Australians that the commitment to deploy the ADF for conflict well outside Australia is the collective will of the people. In truth, I was a little surprised to have been asked to deliver this lecture. As someone whose professional career spanned nearly 42 years of service in our armed forces, that surprise grew even more when I looked back on the eminent Australians who have delivered the previous lectures in the series. But I hope it will become clear in this lecture why most people of my calling should seek the establishment of the conditions that perpetuate the peace. Furthermore, I did not appreciate the circumstances under which I would be delivering this lecture. I am sure everyone has heard of the drawdown and escape of Australian officials and others from Afghanistan over the past few weeks, and the national soul-searching that has taken place since the transition of Afghanistan towards control of the Taliban once again. As well, the announcement last week of the change in the new submarine program for Australia should make us think carefully about our prospects. In retrospect, this process provides a thoughtful background to the theme of my lecture. I have deliberately chosen a title that might seem a little provocative. It is Peace, an Aspirational Leadership Challenge. Can we do better in the 21st century? In canvassing answers to this question, I will consider first of all our strategic situation and our security. Second, the significance of the challenges that lie ahead. And third, how can we make our world better? The message from the UN Secretary-General to mark this year's International Day of Peace tells us that today comes at a crisis point for humanity. I propose to show why this is true, because I will look at two existential threats that cross all the artificial boundaries that we humans have created to separate us. As well, the message draws our attention to the need for peace in which to heal our planet, build a green economy, and achieve net zero targets. We are asked also to renew trust in each other and to put our faith in facts and science. So with all this in mind, here we go. Our geostrategic situation begins at home. We live with the world's oldest continuous culture. This culture has been in existence for over 60,000 years. It is significantly older than all other cultures and intellectual traditions handed down to us over the centuries. Australia is also the oldest, flattest, driest inhabited landmass with the least fertile soils in the world. Since a slow start after Federation, Australia has now become an economic and military power in the Asia-Pacific or Indo-Pacific region of continents and oceans. We are a highly developed country, and we enjoy both economic and political freedoms that should enable a significant development index for humans and livability. It has been said that Australia has become the last frontier of the Western world. New emergent major economic and military power is casting a shadow across the vast Australian continent. Behind this ominous shadow are storm clouds of strategic national risk and security that might serve as a prelude to the undesirable consequences of the rapid rise of Australian rim countries like China. There may be other great shadows in waiting too, perhaps in India and in Indonesia. It is worth reflecting on the grand sweep of strategy since Federation. In the 20th century, Australia participated in the two world wars that dealt finally with the rising power of Germany. Our forebears willingly shouldered the consequences of decisions taken in London mostly, and in the latter years of the Second World War in Washington. At the same time, Australia has become a much more open immigrant nation. We have opened our doors to people from around the globe, looking for new homes, either as a result of war or famine, and sometimes just seeking out better opportunities. Today, we enjoy a relatively stable environment at home and all the benefits of being an island continent without the insecurities of land borders. But we are confronted as the lucky country by other challenges that could impinge on our security. By 2035, there will likely be over 4 billion people in our region. The Australian population is estimated to be near to 30 million people. Within our region, that is not many people. Our near neighbour Indonesia is estimated to be home to 310 million people and may have an economy about triple the size of ours. In 2050, Indonesia's economy is predicted to be the fourth largest in the world, ranking behind the United States. On population densities in 2035, Australia will have the lowest in the world, at 3.8 persons per square kilometre. Indonesia will have a density of 162 people per square kilometre, and Bangladesh 1,248 people per square kilometre. The pressures created by existential threats could affect our security. Over the past 3 decades, we have borne the consequences of change implemented in our law based on needs to improve our security. The question is, what do we mean by security? Well, security can be defined as a state of being free from danger or threat. The idea of security contains a sense of protection for a person, a building, a way of life, and even a country, against threats such as crime or attacks by foreign countries. But sometimes we think about security in the opposite way, when it includes considerations about the quality of life. Think about food and water security, the provision of shelter and health services, as being important elements of our security requirements. My readings, for example, suggest that starvation and fear can promote insecurities that can lead to a collapse of civil law and order. On a large scale, such collapses threaten civilization. So, when we consider responding to the challenges of meeting our security requirements and balancing needs against risks and costs, we should look ahead at our vulnerabilities and finding suitable ways to enhance our security if necessary. We must never leave it too late to start this process. This process begins with assessing the key challenges. Toby Ord, an Australian Senior Research Fellow in Philosophy at Oxford University, writes that he focuses on the big picture questions facing humanity. His 2020 book, The Precipice, Existential Risk and the Future of Humanity, is a dense but compelling read. It's a story of the greatest risks to humanity's future, from the climate crisis and nuclear war to pandemics and artificial intelligence. Toby writes in the dedication, "To the 100 billion people before us who fashioned our civilization, to the 7 billion now alive, whose actions may determine its fate, to the trillions to come, where existence lies in the balance. There are natural risks, anthropogenic risks, and future risks in play." The book concludes with a grand strategy for humanity that includes reaching existential security, the longest reflection, and achieving our potential. Ord is saying that there is nothing more important than looking at our chances of survival. I agree. So now I will focus on the two existential threats to life on planet Earth. The first threat is Armageddon, created by nuclear war. The challenge of preventing nuclear war has shaped international affairs since 1945, with limited success. But the current signs are that we are failing in the effort to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons, and manifestly failing when it comes to eliminate them in the context of nuclear war, and our future will be determined by a few people, those who hold the keys to executing the launch of nuclear weapons, either by accident or by intent. Most people on the planet will play no role in the launch of such events, even though nearly all will become victims of it. Armageddon will impact on us all, even the surviving few. The planet will still exist, but most life on Earth will be extinguished. The second threat to human life on the planet is generated by global warming through the direct and indirect consequences for a changing Earth environment. Human beings are the most predatory species that ever existed on the planet. Think about the population of the planet, which stands at 7.6 billion people today, but has yet to peak at a possible 10 billion people. That represents an increase of over 20%. Scientists and other experts have been creating scenarios about future life on Earth. They lay out some of the problems we will have to confront if we cannot hold down average global warming temperature increases to small increments. But none of these scenarios include thoughts about a world that has achieved 4 degrees Celsius of warming. It is too horrible to contemplate. Scientists have also been telling us for at least the last 30 years that actions to curb the exploitation of planetary resources by human beings are critical to minimising global temperature increases. These uncertainties affect our prospects. The time to make our prospects better, however, has almost run out. There are two major differences in these existential threats. With nuclear war, the time taken to create Armageddon will be very short and impossible to deal with once the process begins. In contrast with global warming, climate change and other environmental consequences, the time taken to eliminate all human life on Earth might take decades. It will likely be very ugly, and it involves indeterminate processes for all of us. The huge volume of evidence assembled by the scientific community gives us overwhelming reasons to take decisive action to change our ways to prevent this future. These perspectives laid the foundation for an important book written by Lord Martin Rees, former Astronomer Royal, in 2004. In Our Final Hour, Rees lays out perspectives on the enormous opportunities and risks of fundamental change now taking place, and has postulated an estimated probability of 1 in 2 that no human beings will exist on planet Earth in the year 2100. For these reasons, I believe urgent action is needed now to head off the disastrous consequence of failing to take decisive action to deal with these threats to the Earth environment. We have no choice. The unacceptable probability is that the legacy we will leave to our children and their children is their extinction. Barbara Tuchman, in her book, The March of Folly, writes about wooden-headedness in governments when she shows that time after time, governments have adopted policies that acted against their own interests. Her examination of history is a reminder about the responsibilities and accountabilities of our political leaders. I believe most governments on the planet today are failing their people by not taking decisive action to mitigate climate change and environmental consequences that result from global warming, and fostering every means of adapting to the circumstances we face, using all the resources available. Even after the 2015 Paris Agreement, I think our posture 6 years later is a manifest failure of leadership. Maybe, at some point in the future, those leaders who have failed to secure a bright future as a legacy for our successors will be held to account. The time to secure a bright future is now very close. In just 40 days' time, under a UN banner, at the 26th Conference of the Parties in Glasgow, world leadership will have the last chance to limit average global warming to 2 degrees Celsius. This is a conclusion I draw from the recent report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. We must act collectively to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by half by 2030. That is over the next 8 years. This perspective is also highly relevant to the Missing in Action agenda that my group at the Australian Security Leaders Climate Group is pursuing to persuade Australian governments to produce a plan for action. On pandemics and artificial intelligence, we are still coming to grips with the implication. But through all this, one thing seems clear. As we draw on a myriad of lessons from our recent experience, there is no future without the involvement of all human beings on the planet pulling in the same direction. We cannot solve problems with the current pandemic in each nation or state alone. The transmission and long-term health effects of the virus knows no borders, no nation states, and can mutate whenever conditions are suitable. That is why we must pull together. Similarly, in solving problems posed by the two existential threats, the involvement of the human beings on the planet is essential, since the consequences of those threats will involve everybody. In short, the world we have created built on competition should now take a back seat to a new world that is based on collaboration. For good collaboration to occur, we need trust, openness, confidence building, and the ability to resolve differences through inspired negotiation rather than damaging adversarial relationships. This may seem a tall order, but I believe there is now hope on the positive side. It has been my privilege over the last 20 years' work at the Australian National University to engage with young and inquiring minds. Throughout, I have been impressed with most of the youngsters I have worked with and admired in them the result of Australia's education system. Most of you will know what I mean. Last week I participated in the second Australian Crisis Simulation Summit that is put together and conducted by a team of 44 students at ANU. The summit engages with an additional 150 people as delegates to the simulation, mentors and other advisors and observers. As in 2020, this year, the 3 simulated scenarios exposed our young generation of aspiring leaders to the challenges that lie ahead at an international level as well as at home. With this background, I believe we now have reached the point actively to pass on to a new generation of leaders the responsibilities and accountabilities for the management of their future. In my opinion, people of my generation should step out of the way to let these young people get on with it. These young people are well connected. They have networks of significant complexity and include models of diversity and inclusion. I have seen them bringing significant insight and energy to problem solving in meeting challenges head on and in the development of policy positions and appropriate decisions. To be aware of the possibilities such as they have experienced in the crisis scenarios suggests many of these young people are ready. Perhaps it is better that they stand in the field to take the challenges on, while our older people stand ready to act as a council of elders. I truly believe that a pragmatic country like ours could do a lot more to fashion solutions to the existential threats that we face without impinging on our security. But we need plans. I also believe that our Parliament should include in its makeup more young people. To be frank, it does not matter to me that many of them should be women acting independently. So now let us consider the big picture. As I close this lecture, I return to the point made already by the UN Secretary-General. This year, our International Day of Peace comes at a crisis point for humanity. I've put my view that we cannot waste any more time before taking action to try and solve these crises. Surely a reflection of our communal experience in Australia over the last few years is a signal about the importance of dealing effectively with these existential threats. The role of the United Nations is paramount. A new world in which collaboration is much more important to our future than competition demands a more effective leadership in the UN. It is essential for our young generation of leaders to become involved. Old paradigms that divided our world must disappear. We all live on planet Earth. We share its bounties and we deal with its vulnerabilities. There is much work to do, and I call on those Australians who in the past had fashioned the basic building blocks for collaboration during and after the Second World War to emerge once again, to go out into the world and work for the betterment of all. We were heavily involved in the creation of the United Nations in 1945. Australia's Minister for External Affairs, H.V. Evatt, and staff played a vital role in framing the Charter, and we played an important role in drafting the articles of the UN Charter that deal with the Security Council. On 26th of June 1945, Australia was one of 50 nations that signed the United Nations Charter at a conference in San Francisco. United States President Harry Truman addressed the final session of the conference. He said, "The Charter of the United Nations, which you have just signed, is a solid structure upon which we can build a better world. History will honour you for it. Between the victory in Europe and the final victory in Japan, in this most destructive of all wars, you have won a victory against war itself." The United Nations became a reality after a few months on the 24th of October. I note too, however, that back then Australia argued against allowing the permanent members a veto power in the Security Council. Reflective consideration on the effective of the current Security Council may offer insights for necessary reform. Work to reform structure and processes better capable of dealing with the challenges we now face as humanity is underway at the UN. The current Secretary-General made proposals about reform when he took up office in January 2017. Some easy reforms have been made, but the bulk of the work requiring cultural change across all key pillars of activity to deliver tangible results for people on the ground remains to be done. The reform is to be completed by 2030. The Special Advisor to the Secretary-General on Reform has put out a video on implementation. It shows the impact being achieved through benefits management and driving greater culture change across the UN system. It is not shy about stating that there is a lot more work to do. The aim is to make the UN that is transparent, agile and accountable. The Secretary-General is looking towards a UN that is impactful, not only in the Sustainable Development Agenda, but also on the peace and security agenda. The United Nations faces new challenges in ensuring peace and security, promoting sustainable development, protecting human rights, and delivering humanitarian aid. Today's conflicts cause immense human suffering, increased human casualties, displacement, often reversing hard-fought political and human rights and development gains, and putting the Sustainable Development Goals at risk. This rapidly shifting global landscape is why a series of interrelated reforms, including a restructuring of the peace and security pillar, is needed. The intention is designed to make the peace and security pillar more coherent, pragmatic, nimble and effective, capable of collaboration with partners across the UN system and outside it to prevent violent conflict. A unified peace and security pillar with a renewed commitment to prevention and sustainment of peace is working on a number of key shared priorities in line with the overall vision of the pillar, which is peace, dignity and equality on a healthy planet. To be sure, this is an aspirational leadership challenge. I hope I have explained why it is so important today and why we must do better in the 21st century. Time is short. The effort will involve us all, but primarily it must include our young leaders, because it is their future after all. Thank you.